For Dunkley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to follow that incredibly thoughtful and honest contribution from the member for Cowper. He and I share some similarities with some of our pre-parliamentary careers with a long history of working in the criminal justice system. As a solicitor and a barrister, and particularly as a legal aid barrister, I've represented victims, perpetrators, men, women and children. And it is impossible to have had that job and to have been involved with the people who have suffered domestic violence or perhaps have committed it because they were brought up in a family or a community where that was the attitude and the behaviours that they were taught, and to have met children who have been exposed to domestic violence and not understand that this is a complex, difficult, but fundamentally crucial issue that we all have to work together to solve. So thank you for that contribution. This legislation, as many people have said, is an important step forward in trying to deal with the consequences for particularly women of domestic violence. And it is the culmination of a 10-year campaign. The first time 10 days paid domestic violence leave was included in an enterprise agreement was in my state in Victoria on the Surf Coast with the Council and the Australian Services Union, when the now member for Corangamite was the mayor of that council 10 years ago. This is an important reform, and it should be a proud moment for the government and for those that support this legislation in this chamber and the upper house who aren't in the government. But it should also be a time for all of us to reflect on the fact that it's taken 10 years, and in those 10 years the need for paid domestic violence leave has grown, not diminished. You know, despite genuine efforts from state and federal governments, Labor and Liberal, over many years, we have not been able to address violence in relationships, violence in the community, violence predominantly perpetrated by men against the women and the children that they purport to, and in many cases do, love. It's just a fact that this is an issue that continues to cause devastation across communities, and we haven't been able to address it despite genuine efforts. And I agree with the member for Cowper. The community want to know that more is happening than words. And I don't think that any of the words that any of us in this place, no matter what our political party or independent status is, are simply platitudes. I genuinely believe they come from deeply held beliefs and a deeply held desire to address this issue. But we can't keep talking about it and not find solutions. And in my opinion, informed significantly by my decade and a half experience working in the criminal justice system, we can't continue to focus on assisting people once they're in the position of having experienced domestic violence. We can't continue to focus simply only on punishing people who have perpetrated domestic violence if we want to actually crack this cycle. Both of those measures are very important, and this legislation is very important in that first measure of assisting people who have experienced and been subjected to domestic violence to be able to do what they need to do to secure their and their children's safety without also having to lose work and income. They are both incredibly important things to do. But we also have to do more to prevent it happening in the first place. We have to change the culture that exists that allows attitudes that are based on outdated gender stereotypes that perpetrate gender inequality or perpetuate gender inequality, that somehow turn a blind eye to violence to continue in this country. The experts tell us, and have been telling us for a long time, that the driving factor causing this ongoing scourge of domestic violence is gender inequality and outdated entrenched gender stereotypes. So whilst we must do everything we can to assist people to get out of situations of domestic violence, violence also including non-physical violence, coercion, financial coercion, we must do that. While we must make sure that people who engage in those unacceptable behaviours are punished for it and held to account, we also have to do more to make sure that the perpetrators can break their personal cycle of perpetrating and can get out of the cycle of reoffending, and that it doesn't start in the first place. And I mean, nothing I'm saying is particularly surprising or particularly innovative. It's what we have known for some time. People who work in the system tell us this. Social workers, counsellors, police officers, lawyers, people who work across the system tell us this. We can't keep treating the symptoms and the consequences. We also have to address the causes. And many state governments, particularly my state government of Victoria, have acknowledged the link between gender inequality and outdated gender stereotypes and domestic and family violence. And in Victoria, there is a gender equality strategy to address it. We know that we need to invest more in prevention through, as the member for Cowper and I'm sure other people have said, education, respectful relationship education, starting with really young children. Gender equality, starting with very young children. Making sure that the way we used to see ourselves perhaps a generation ago in Australia, where men were tough and played footy and drank beer, and women were pretty and wore bikinis and, were good at cooking, that's not what young people see as the role of men and women, and only. That young people in our communities and our families know that to be a man can be to be sensitive, to be vulnerable, to be supportive, to be kind. That to be a woman can be to be strong, to be assertive, to be successful in whatever endeavour one takes on. Or vice versa. But the old gender stereotypes where the man is the head of the house and the woman is subservient, believe it or not, still exist in too many parts of our society. And we have to do more to make sure that children aren't shackled by those stereotypes, that they are free to be who they want to be and to be equal. We also have to keep on the path that this government has started, and there was some work done by the previous government, about economic security and equality for women. One of the reasons it's so important to have paid domestic violence leave is because of the fact that so many women say they don't leave because of the financial consequences of leaving. And that's because they often work in the highly feminised industries, which are the lowest paid industries in the country. They often had significant periods out of the workforce, so their superannuation balances are significantly lower than men's. They may not have equity in a home. And they have responsibilities, particularly if they take the children with them, for childcare and unaffordable childcare. And that's another gender stereotype that we can do more in a public policy sense to help with the culture in this country is to give men more opportunities to be carers for their children and women more opportunities to go to work. And again, that goes towards gender equality. So we have to keep working in that field. We also have to continue to invest in services for perpetrators to prevent reoffending. And for most people, there's an instinctive sort of, what? Why would we support perpetrators? And I absolutely understand that. But unless we have programs that we know work, that are evaluated, that are successful, to help men to learn how not to reoffend, to change their behaviours, to change their attitudes, then we aren't going to stop those individual offenders' cycles of offending, and it's going to be much harder to stop the macro cycle of offending. And until we are able to do that and move towards a society where, for example, if the local hero of the footy team is also up before the courts for domestic violence, the club says, we don't support you, we actually hold you accountable for that behaviour. Until things like that are commonplace, we do have to keep supporting victims. In my community in Dunkley, in Frankston, we have higher than average instances of domestic violence. So we do need to keep supporting the people who are the victims. One of the things I'm very pleased about as a result of the election of the Albanese Labor government is there will be 7 new support workers for domestic violence victims provided to my community, and that will be very important. I'm also keen to make sure that children who have experienced or witnessed domestic violence are given the supports that they need and, quite frankly, the counselling that they need to ensure that that experience doesn't predispose them to falling into the cycle of either being a victim when they're an adult or being a perpetrator, because we know that there is that cycle. So support for children is incredibly important alongside that education. So I'm very much looking forward to the next 3 years as in government to be part of working on gender equality in sport, in work, at home, both because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for men and for women. It opens up opportunities that are either legally or in many cases still culturally not available to both men and women. It's good for productivity, it's good for the economy, and it's also a really important plank in dealing with things like domestic violence, which so many people have said for so long is intolerable and we must address. And I look forward to the day that we don't have to say that anymore, because we have been successful in changing culture, behaviour and attitudes in this country, and I commend this bill as a very important step in that direction. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.